Hello party people and welcome to office hours in Cabo San Lucas on the beach. I was gonna shoot the sunrise to let y'all see the sunrise as it happens, but then as I was setting up the cameras I realized you can't see both me and the sunrise. So the sunrise is going to be happening over there. This is the what we call the end of the world here down at Cabo San Lucas, the arch down there. The sun rises up over there and you see all these swimming boats that are, fishing boats that are coming out here today that are heading out now to go whale watching, take people go fishing and all that kind of thing. So what I'll do instead is I just move the camera around this way so at least I can be out on the beach and I'll see the sunrise. You'll see things brighter, but I'll show it to you as it officially starts to rise up here. It's like 6:41. We got about 15 minutes before the sun rises, and while we do that, I will go answer your questions. So the top voted question from PollGab is from Junior Wannabe DBA. Junior Wannabe DBA asks, "Hi Brent, a colleague wants to upgrade from Standard Edition to Enterprise Edition purely for the performance gains on several servers." He says our servers are up to 8 cores, 128 gigs of RAM, SQL Server 2016 or 2019. Is this change worth paying for? I can't find any benchmarks to support or contradict such a change. So what I would step back and ask is, what are the SQL Server's top bottlenecks? For each one of them, what's its top bottleneck and what are the queries or indexes that are causing that bottleneck? And when you say you have up to 8 CPU cores, at 8 CPU cores, that's a difference in licensing of about $40,000 just for that one SQL Server alone. If someone wanted to spend $40,000 to make performance better, I would say that the onus is on them in order to go prove that it's actually going to make things faster. Because most of the time in my experience, that one change alone, without also making other changes like putting more memory into it, isn't going to be enough to get you across the finish line. However, one scenario where it totally does make sense is if you start consolidating and paying licensing by the VMware or Hyper-V host rather than each individual guest. You happen to mention that you have several SQL servers, including one of up to 8 CPU cores. Well, that means that you could start licensing the VMware host and then run as many guests as you want on there. That's a really common scenario when you only have, you only have a few SQL servers, like you mentioned that you have a few. So just license one VMware host or Hyper-V host, license it with Enterprise Edition, and then all the guests get to run Enterprise Edition. If you're licensing via Standard Edition, you have to pay to license every single guest, which ends up in some situations costing you more than just licensing the whole host with Enterprise. So run those numbers and that might be a win. Next up, and I should answer too, so you can't find any benchmarks to support or contradict. Yeah, because I don't think that I've ever seen anything go out like that either. If you're going to say just going to Enterprise Edition made this much of a performance boost, you wouldn't see anybody running that benchmark unless they also upgraded memory at the same time. Usually when I see people go to Enterprise Edition, like we talked about, it's $40,000 extra on an 8-core server. I'm like, what, as long as we're putting 40 grand worth of software in here, how about we throw a few grand worth of memory in here and take this thing to 256 or 512? And then that's where if you saw the server being storage bottlenecked, you'd see the performance take off for other reasons. Next up, we have OhMyKingdomForANetworkEngineer says, "Hi Brent, you mentioned DNS CNAMEs to redirect during log shipping failovers. My friend wants to redirect end users to a new production server after upgrading by changing their CNAME, but knows nothing about DNS, CNAMEs, or Active Directory. My Googling skills didn't help. Is this some kind of Active Directory magic?" It's not Active Directory magic. You can do it with any kind of DNS setup, but here's the thing I would take a pause on. If you don't have a network person, whoever manages your Active Directory, your logins, your security, if you don't have someone who manages that for you and you're trying to use this technique, I wouldn't. I would stop there, and I would just go through and change whenever you go do an upgrade, move over to a new SQL Server. Just go power down the old, change the old SQL Server's name to be whatever _old, power it down, power on the new SQL Server, rename it to match what the old SQL Server was. And there's a knowledge base article with the stuff you have to do when you rename a SQL Server. But rename that new SQL Server to match what the old one's name was. I know one company and one client of mine whose production SQL Server is still called SQL 2005 for that exact reason. It's a 2019 box, but they still call it 2005. That way you don't have to do something that you're uncomfortable with, and I would hate to have you do something uncomfortable with and put it in your production path if you've never done it before. Having said that, I'm always real suspicious when companies have database people and they don't have Windows engineers or systems engineers who are handling that kind of thing. That gives me a little bit of pause and nervousness there. So why does it give me pause and nervousness? I'm going to move this camera a little further back because I'm getting ready to yell. No, so why does it give me pause and nervousness? Because if you don't have a Windows engineer or Linux engineer, whoever you want to do, enough that knows what a DNS CNAME is, I get really nervous that we're taking other security shortcuts or OS patching shortcuts too. Next question, Loud Howard asks, "Hi Brent, what are your top Microsoft hype features of SQL Server that never caught on?" Okay, so one comes to mind immediately, which is Java stored procedures. When that came out, I just could hear this thud in the room. Java stored procedures. CLR never really caught on that much. The only reason one of the few reasons where people usefully use CLR these days is for regular expressions in SQL Server. But I think the bigger complaint from the community is more like, yo, why don't we get regex support in SQL Server? Why do you make me deal with this CLR crap? Not that CLR's crap. But I think my all-time favorite has to be SQL Server notification services. Back in, I want to say it was 2005, Microsoft brought out SQL Server notification services and then deprecated it at the first service pack, I think. And I remember even hearing stories that someone was a notification services MVP from Microsoft, and that poor person lost out a heck of an opportunity there. But I would always say my advice with features is always, whenever something comes out, let it bake for a version and see what they do in the next version, because there have just been so many one and done features that never got $1 worth of improvement. And I'm going to rattle some feature names off here, and it's going to piss people off, but whatever. Change data capture, change tracking, replication. There have been all these features where they come out and they solve a real world pain, but then you hear all these screaming from end users about, oh my God, we need blank. Oh my God, we need blank. And they don't get any help from Microsoft. They just stop putting development money into it. Somebody in the comments is going to be like, well, but we just got something for peer-to-peer replication. Yeah, but it's 2019 and that came out like 2 decades ago. You know, you can't invest something like once every 2 decades and call it a win. Next up, SQL Steward says, "Hey Brent, a friend of mine is trying to explain to his boss why using a function to create a temp table, which you then recreate your main OLAP, like data warehouse, fact table every 5 minutes is a crazy bad idea. How would you explain this in plain English? I really appreciate all you do." For me, that one's very simple. It's the transaction log throughput. If you're replacing, I'm just going to make a number up, a 10 gigabyte table every 5 minutes, that's 10 gigabytes of data that's going into the transaction log that then has to go get replicated everywhere else. 10 gigabytes every 5 minutes isn't going to kill you. 100 gigabytes every 5 minutes is going to kill you dead. So it's the part of writing all this stuff into a new table. So then you have to start thinking about all the things that you have to do in order to avoid that problem, like using minimal logging, trying to do bulk inserts a certain way, But just open that up and say, did you think about this? And if you haven't thought about this, and you can help to illustrate that problem if you show them how large the table is today. And just do a simple insert into another table name and watch to see how much transaction log backups you have. That's how much would need to be replicated to every always on availability group replica, database mirroring, SAN replication, all that kind of stuff. Let alone everything else involved with the locking and blocking. Francesco says, hi Dad. To be clear, I have no children and I have no plans to. Hi Dad, do linked servers handle parallelism on the remote server? Is the option MAXDOP whatever worth using in a linked server query? You rock, make those turtles go faster. For the record, he's referring to the turtle nests, and I should move the camera around so you can see the little posts. There are, I don't know that you're gonna see it, but there are posts on the beach that mark where the turtle nests are. So you might see a couple of posts down there, and then there's another post over here as well. Posts on the beach that mark where the turtle nests are, and the baby sea turtles make their way out to the sea every morning. So we go out there and look, because they don't all hatch at the same time. They hatch out of their eggs at different times. So we go out here and patrol the beach each morning to make sure that they make it all the way to the sea and that they don't get picked up by birds. Because sometimes they kind of get mixed up with where the lights are around here, the bright moon, and they don't see where the sea is. So my answer to that about parallelism on the remote server, so yes, I think I'm getting bitten by something out here and I don't know what it is. So does SQL Server handle parallelism on the remote server? Yes. My bigger question though would be, why are you sending so much work over to the linked server that you need parallelism? If you find yourself doing big, huge operations like scanning the table on the remote server to pull stuff back, that's your sign that you would really you need to connect to the server that has the data that you want. I am okay with linked servers doing pinpoint, pull this 5 rows back or pull this 2 rows back, doing a very quick go check the customer or something like that, even though it's a nightmarish hellscape for caching and concurrency. But if you find yourself performance tuning linked servers, yo dog, it's time to just go connect to the server that you need. Next up, DBA Greg asks, is there any reason to stagger start times for CheckDB on availability group replicas? We just added a 3rd node and we have all of the replicas CheckDBs running on the same schedule. Is there any impact on things like log replays between nodes when CheckDB runs? And would the internal snapshot affect this? I have absolutely no idea. Absolutely no idea. I've never measured that or experimented with it. If I had to go to start by checking someplace, frankly, I would probably just go do it and go see what happens. The times where I would be concerned about it is if you have high transaction throughput at the same time that you're trying to do CheckDB. Like if you're trying to deal with 100 queries per second, which isn't usually a high throughput number that I use. Usually I think 1,000 or 10,000 batch requests a second is my more mark of, oh, there's something going on the server. But if you're worried about CheckDB, even at 100 batch requests a second, I would say, okay, then go in and start running the tests. But if you're not even running 100 batch requests a second, I don't know that I'd worry about it. David says, hi Brent, is it okay to defrag the data files in disk? The VM is hosted on a VMware platform. The database sizes are 2 to 4 terabytes. I would not bother with that. No, that isn't something that's going to get you across the finish line from making the storage fragmented defragmented from VMware's perspective. No, that you can ignore that. GreatWorkBrent asks, were you aware that your videos don't play in YouTube's restricted mode? My work enforces this mode. It may be due to your graphically violent slaying of common SQL problems, or your profane and incendiary comments about stupid people doing stupid things, or you have a drinking problem. Well, that's a great question. For my videos to play in restricted mode, I would have to say that they're okay for children. And for me to do that, like, I feel guilty. I don't purposely do anything foul or obscene or whatever. But every now and then I'll let an F-bomb rip, or I will be drinking booze while streaming. I'm not doing it today. It's early in the morning. It's 6:55 a.m. I will have a Bloody Mary with breakfast, probably. I say that. I did that the last couple of days. I probably won't today. But it's just not worth the risk for me. That isn't something that I would want to get, because if you run afoul with it, if you say that your videos are safe for children and then they are not, then YouTube starts taking swings at you if things are reported. So unfortunately, I would say that the big takeaway here is that your boss thinks that you're children. Next up, Kumaran asks, "Hi Brent, we have an application with many dynamic SQL stored procedures. Microsoft suggests to parameterize the exec SQL, and the app team prefers not to rewrite the stored procedures. My friend says dynamic SQL should be avoided for better performance and for query stats. Is he only right about dynamic SQL at the app layer?" I think in here almost everybody's wrong. I wish I had a fast answer for this, but I have about an hour on this in the mastering server tuning class around the problems with unparameterized dynamic SQL. And then I have about an hour and a half in the mastering query tuning class on how to build properly parameterized dynamic SQL. The thing that I would say to you is, yes, it's nice to want properly parameterized dynamic SQL, and dynamic SQL is wonderful for a performance perspective. Dynamic SQL is better than stored procedures in many cases, which I show you why that is in mastering query tuning. But the drawback of this is this mild suggestion. It's easy for a database administrator to say, you should change the way you're doing T-SQL, but it's really hard for application people to redo all of that work. Step back and ask, what's the team's biggest problem? Like, what's the server's biggest problem? And how do I go about solving that problem as quickly and efficiently as possible? Because it's probably not going to be like giving advice to rewrite all your T-SQL. Let's take a moment here to go shout out to our sponsor, the sun. So we have here the sunrise happening here in Cabo. So I'll leave it there for a second while I do the next question here. Let's see. The next question is Kumaran. Kumaran again, a different person or a different question. Kumaran says, could you suggest any solutions for SQL Server patching that is SQL Server feature aware? No. Unfortunately, the problem with SQL Server patching is you can't just be feature aware, you also have to think about things like backups. If you have a running backup, for example, you probably don't want the patching to start in the middle of it and then make your backup fail. That would be kind of catastrophic. You would probably want the patching to allow the backup to finish before the patching kicks off. So that's the problems with that, with like long-running CheckDB jobs, with data warehouse loads, you name it. That's why there are no feature-aware patching type stuff. I'm going to move the camera over here just because we've also got whales jumping over here. And I don't know that I'm going to see them well with this camera. Normally I use a zoom lens for this, but I'll just go on with the next question and we'll see if we get lucky with catching any of the whales jumping while we're out there. Next up we have SQL 100. SQL 100 says, when trying to design a data warehouse, there will be data coming from different sources. Do you recommend converting the data into a CSV file so that it can then be imported easily, or should we do it directly from the database? For this, I really like an ETL tool, something like SSIS, Azure Data Factory, AWS Glue, that manages those kinds of transformations. I don't know if you see it, but the whale is right there, is spouting over there, that manages these kinds of transformations for you. And I can't zoom because I don't have a zoom lens in with me. And because the reason why is the same tool that generates the CSVs, the work that gets put into generating the CSVs, it's going to have to do things like change detection and understanding, which rows change, which rows are new, which rows need to be deleted. Well, the kind of tool that you use to build that is typically an ETL tool like SSIS or Azure Data Factory. So you might as well just have that manage the entire import-export process. And you leave that to those professionals. They can pull directly from one database to another, or you can have different teams put out a CSV or a JSON file into a central file share that then everybody pulls from. Brave Sir Robin asks, hi Brent, should we do any SQL maintenance tasks non-traditionally? I don't even know what that means. If we have crazy fast temp DB and crazy fast SAN. When you say any SQL maintenance tasks non-traditionally, I'm not sure what you're fishing for there. You may want to be more specific about the problem that you're trying to solve. What is it that you feel like you need to change about your setups? When you say non-traditionally, the one thing that always comes to mind is SAN snapshot backups. So if you want to look into SAN snapshot backups, great. But otherwise, ask about the problem you're trying to solve. Next up, Gob Bluth asks, hello Brent, how do you measure write latency to an always-on synchronous replica? And here we'll switch the cameras back around. How do you, not that you necessarily always need to see me, but whatever, there we have it. It says Gob Bluth asked, how do you measure write latency to an always-on synchronous secondary replica? For that, what you want to do is look at the server's wait stats. Under wait stats, there is a wait type called header sync commit, HADR sync commit. And that measures the latency of sending transactions to the synchronous secondaries. And as you're looking at that wait type, what you want to look at is average milliseconds response time. You have to calculate that yourself. You take the total time that it waited, divided by the number of times that you waited for that. And that'll give you in milliseconds how long the sync secondary took in order to answer every insert, update, or delete. You can also think of that as the average length of time that's being added to each transaction. Next up, a DBA DBAing says, sometimes I see multiple values for the same parameter in the cached parameters section of SP Blitz Cache. What is the reason for that? The reason is that you have multiple plans in the cache for the same stored procedure. And a common cause for that is if someone goes into Management Studio and they type set ANSI nulls on or set ANSI nulls off, they have the opposite setting of whatever the application is doing. You'll get one plan cached for ANSI nulls on and another plan cached for ANSI nulls off. I heard a boat honk, which is why I looked around. You don't usually hear boats honking. Different plans cached for different connection options. So we're giving you all of the parameters that populated all of the plans in cache. And then we should end on this one. Rafra asks, how do you select the picturesque places where you stay and stream your office hours from? Well, I pick the place I want to go, and then I just happen to take y'all with me. So Erica and I first came to the resort right down there. The used to be called the Resort at Pedregal. Now it is the, Waldorf Astoria? Waldorf Astoria at Pedregal. They got fancy. Several years ago on a Black Friday sale, coincidentally, Erica found a Black Friday sale there. It was phenomenal. Love that resort. It's absolutely amazing. But these days it's $2,000 to $4,000 a night. Oh. We stayed when it was much cheaper, and we had a Black Friday sale. I think we only spent like $300 a night, and even that was expensive, but it is a hell of a nice place. And so we fell in love with that, and we came back there several times afterwards, usually on Black Friday sales each time. We ended up, I wanted to live here. I was like, this place is absolutely amazing, but there's only one condo building on the beach, which is where I happened to move into. So it took a lot of planning and help from Erica over the years, and finally bought down here So you'll see more streams down in the Baja Peninsula of Mexico as I go back and forth between San Diego and Mexico. All right, so the sun is coming up. The sun has risen. I will go pop this over here so that you can see just that the sun is rising, or has popped back up here. So I'm going to go head out for the day. I'm going to go first get breakfast from the restaurant down at the condo, and then go stumble around downtown. I have to go get a pool raft, among other things, and I will see y'all at the next office hours. Adios.